Good evening, and thank you for coming to my talk. I really appreciate it. Since I came all the way from Arizona, I thank you very much. Forgive if my voice is a little coarse due to cold air and cigarettes tonight. I had to have one right before the lecture, just to calm it up. I'm not going to assume, even though I am in Blackfoot territory, that all of you know who Napi is. So I will use Hugh Dempsey's most recent definition of characterization of Napi to, just begin the talk. Napi, old man, is the creator of the Blackfoot world. It is either the son, Natosi's brother, or his reincarnation on Earth, his human incarnation. Napi is a sexually charged male who is not revered as a god because of his propensity to commit sins. Napi has three personalities: the transformer, who creates the world and sometimes destroys it to recreate it; the trickster, the sinner man, who always gets in trouble and gets everyone else in trouble, particularly his pet, his dog; and the teacher of social values through contrary behavior. So with that, I would like to dedicate this talk to my friend and teacher, the late Alan Part, from whom I learned the intricacies of the Blackfoot world. Not solely from him, but he was probably my most important teacher. He coined the term, Napi is the environment. On the last time I saw him, he said, I have come to realize that the old man is the environment. And so he inspired the contents of this talk. In the 20 years that I have been working with the Blackfoot, primarily with the Blackfoot tribe of Montana, but also with the members of the Confederacy, I have heard many aspects of the Blackfoot cultural and historical conundrum. There is the issue of knowledge loss, how to recover the knowledge if it's possible, how to revitalize culture, how to define Blackfoot identity and legitimacy in the territory, convince people that they are not newcomers but have been here for a very long time, since the end of the last glaciation in scientific terms. And also how to teach not simply youth, Blackfoot youth, but others, non-Blackfoot, who the Blackfoot are, and who they were, and who they will become. So, with that idea in mind, my colleague Francois Lanoy from the University of Arizona and I, we started the Blackfoot Early Origins Program. And the Blackfoot Early Origins Program encompasses a number of projects, and I will give you a brief summary of that. It is interdisciplinary. We looked at a variety of different regions, and it has been going on, especially along research, teaching, and outreach for more than a decade. And of course, inevitably, I forget to click the last slide, the thank you slide of my talk, so I figure I should thank people first, my collaborators and my sponsors particularly. Before I move, as you can tell, we have many collaborators from many different disciplines. And we also have a variety of different sponsors. So to them, we are extremely grateful. So what are the main principles of our program? And this is important because it is primarily archaeological, although we also do a little bit of ethnography and oral history and ethnohistory. But it's mainly focused on archaeology. And the most important principle here that we follow is that science has to be multivocal. Scientific plurality is essential if we're going to build collaboration with the Blackfoot and in general with non-Western scientists. We also believe that integrating science and oral history, oral tradition, creation stories actually fulfills that principle of plurality because we give equal value to science and to non-scientific views of the world. We also inquire into deep time persistence, and this is something that Blackfoot have really emphasized for us. So we have projects that specifically address this deep time, question. And we approach our research from a landscape perspective. That is something that I have been doing since the very first day of the job that I have held for 30 years. We do landscape scale research. And even if we excavate individual sites, those sites are never standing alone. They are always part of a human landscape. And that is a big emphasis of all of our projects, all of our research. And we innovate. When I promised the Blackfoot that I will do science for them, I promised to get funding to throw every scientific innovation, method, theory, analysis, technology, to actually innovate and update what was known about the Blackfoot pre-contact culture and Blackfoot evolution, cultural and ethnic evolution. When I came 20 years ago, the ideas that we have now about the Blackfoot did not exist. And we thank in great part to their love for science and their generosity in letting us innovate what we do. And ultimately, our aspiration is to eventually co-create knowledge, to work together to co-create knowledge. So here is a sampler of our projects. I'm not going to go over in any detail because we have a lot to cover, but we've run the gamut. We started out reconstructing bison hunting landscapes. We have reconstructed specific sites as possible multi-ethnic boundary crossings. We then delve into the peopling of the Rocky Mountain Front, the Northern Rocky Mountain Front, the Pleistocene-Holocene transition. That project also involved genomics. We developed an interactive mapping with over 600 Blackfoot place names. And we produce educational materials, and now in the future, hopefully the near future, we're going to produce a children's book at the 4th grade level that integrates Blackfoot oral tradition, Blackfoot creation stories specifically, and science. This is a sampler of our most recent publications. The upper publication is the one that contains a summary of this lecture. And the other two below that are most general synthesis of genomic synthesis and paleoenvironmental and archaeological synthesis of our project on the peopling of North America and specifically on the first ancestors of the Blackfoot. The other two are regional reconstructions, brand new cultural history. So it is difficult, if not impossible, without applying a little bit of science, to actually pinpoint time into creation stories. The Blackfoot have many sets of oral traditions. We will only talk about Napi. We more or less can pinpoint when did they possibly came to being. But remember, oral tradition is by definition timeless because it lives on through millennia and continues to be, created and recreated through time. So without pigeonholing these oral traditions into an archaeological chronology, I will go through the Napi creation stories and show you how they can actually be, underlined by scientific discovery. So, to be able to do that, What we needed to do is to reframe our own philosophical framework. We cannot treat Blackfoot creation, Napi creation, as a creationist, Western creationist view of the world, of all world traditions, religions. I mean, we can't do that because the world is created and recreated all the time as we understand them. We also have to question our concepts of time and space because they are different. Blackfoot and scientific views of time and space are a little different. In Blackfoot, space takes over time, whereas in archaeology, time is the single most important variable. In fact, a practical variable, a heuristic device called chronology. It's arbitrary, it's statistical, but it allows us to order things in time so that we can explain them. We also have to face the fact that creation stories are not historical truths in the strict Western scientific sense of the word. They actually speak of context of human action, of process, environmental processes, cultural processes, and specific events. And that is an important thing to remember in order to be able to connect them. And then memory work. How are things remembered? What kinds of things are remembered and which ones have actually been lost through time? Memory is very discerning. Some information important to the survival of the community are actually kept, even as a time capsule. Through time, they survive millennia, whereas other memories are very specific to a particular time lived. And that also needs to be taken into consideration. And then emplacement is part of considering people in the land and how do they attach to the land through time, and how the land and the stories and the science actually can come together. And finally, bundling, which is the ability to pull together places, objects, humans, and non-human persons, deities, spirits, animals, together to act in concert so that the result of that interaction is larger than the sum of parts. And the concept of time that we are working on when we talk about Napi origin stories, Native Americans believe in time immemorial, a time before memory, a time before science, perhaps a time that science cannot touch yet. If you hear somebody said, Native Americans were in North America 200,000 years ago, science cannot reach that far. We simply have no scientific evidence for that. That doesn't mean that it could be embedded in an oral tradition, in a creation story, but we cannot communicate at that level. So we prefer to communicate with the term legal time, and I use this because legal time is really part of Indian claims, and it is important. Legal time is a time that you can actually pinpoint through different lines of evidence, independent lines of evidence. And then, of course, for our purpose, we think that legal time, as documented with oral traditions in archaeology, begins with Napi's world, begins with his creative world. So I'm going to propose to you that Napi's world conveys an eyewitness account of the Pleistocene-Holocene transition, which in lay terms means the end of the Ice Age and the transition into an ice-free world. So for early colonization, the peopling of the Rocky Mountain front, and in general, what we think of legal time independent lines of evidence, first and foremost, are Napi creation stories. Then we have paleogenomics, DNA, ancient DNA, historical linguistics, paleoclimate and ecology, geology, geomorphology, and archaeology. All of those lines of evidence can actually come together when trying to integrate Napi creation, because the archaeological record of this particular transition, the Pleistocene-Holocene transition, is extraordinarily fragmentary all along the northern Rocky Mountain front and elsewhere. It's fragmentary. So it requires a lot of scientific fields to contribute to that reconstruction, and in addition to that, Napi creation stories actually lend like a really rich, deep cultural context to the process. So when do we think the Napi's world began? When did they begin? Well, the line of evidence that we have, very recent, we just got it last year, it is genomics, ancient DNA. We did a DNA project with the Kainai Nation and the Blackfoot tribe, and we were able to pinpoint that genetically, all the samples, historical and present samples from volunteers and also from historical remains, they all kept together when we analyzed them statistically. They were all very homogeneous when compared to other DNA from other ethnic groups. But here's the cool thing. I don't know if you can see it. Oh yeah, you can see that graph. That is the phylogenetic tree, the genetic tree of North American populations, of American populations, including South America, that we know of. It is of course biased because it is underrepresented, as you can imagine. But if you look at the UPIC and the USR1 in Alaska, those northern Beringian populations, those are what we consider the very first Americans, the earlier genetically distinctive people in the continent. All right. If you look straight down to the left, those are the Blackfoot ancestors and modern people. There is very little difference or minor differences between the DNA from modern elders that work with us and historical ancestors. But look how distinctive it is. And the third part of that graph is that the Blackfoot lineage split and stood by itself well before other northern North American, like the Athabascans, and southern North American, like the people from the Southwest and the Great Basin, actually spilled from the lineage. So that means that the lineage is much older, 5,000 years older on average, than all of the other lineages, including, people who live along the Rocky Mountain front. So that gives us a sense of time that tells us that at least genetically distinctive ancestors of the Blackfoot were present in North America. We don't know exactly where, but we were present in North America during the Ice Age, the Late Pleistocene, not just the Pleistocene-Holocene transition, but much older than that. Sorry, I'm having trouble with this. In addition to that, we took a really close look and reassessed what we know about Blackfoot linguistics. Because for a long time, the Blackfoot language was considered a classic Algonquian language that derived from the Great Lakes. Well, part of that language, for sure, is classic Algonquian, probably that picked up from the Great Lakes. But there is a portion of Blackfoot language that is not Algonquian, and that is much older than classic Algonquian. It is called Proto-Blackfoot. We don't know where it came. All we know is that it predates everyone in the continent who spoke Algonquian. And that is really important, an important line of evidence. It's difficult to date linguistic splits, but it tells us that there is something extremely old, not only in the DNA, in Blackfoot DNA, but also in Blackfoot linguistics. Now, here's the conundrum. We do not have archaeological sites that date as old as 18,000. And from 18,000 to 13,000, we pretty much do not have sites south of the Yukon. The oldest sites stay in Beringia, and they are very difficult to determine as valid archaeological contexts. That takes a lot of work to do, but we do have old sites, very old sites. Here in Alberta, Wallis Beach, very, along the St. Mary Reservoir. And if we go down, just south of the border, we have Billabong Spring, which is the one we have excavated, that contains really evidence of the entire sequence of Paleoindian occupation. The entire sequence of Blackfoot occupation of the territory. So one of the things that I have a hard time explaining to the elders is that the world, Napi's world, that world of the late Pleistocene was very different than the world where their more recent ancestors lived. It is a world that can only be seen in dreams and visions or in scientific reconstructions, because we simply do not know how that world looked like. But we have some ideas about how the world came to be the way it is now. And in Napi creation stories are twofold. The first creation on land and the second creation on water. And those two have very important paleoenvironmental reference. So in the first story, Napi and his pet, his dog, land on the south. We don't know exactly where. People think maybe Wyoming. And as they move north, they begin creating the world. Lakes, mountains, animals, plants. And they move north all the way across Wyoming, across Montana, what is now Montana, and they come to Alberta. And that is where human creation actually happens, or at least how we interpret it happened from the stories. And what is interesting is the parallel of this story from south to north, the parallel with what we know of landscape renewal after the Ice Age. As the ice was melting, how the renewal happened, how the vegetations returned from south to north, how did the landscape rebounded and created new landforms after the ice melted. We know all of that, and we also have paleofauna that allows us to reconstruct not only the sequence of renewal, but also climate, how climate changed, and how climate impacted the paleoenvironment. This is a very cool story that I gathered at Glenbow Archives. It's never been published. It is about the creation of red paint, and as you know, red paint is really, it runs in Blackfoot veins. Red paint is incredibly important. Its healing is transformative. It's conservatory, it consecrates everything. Well, in this old story, this obscure story about Reverend Wilson, as Napi created the earth, whenever he got hurt and bled, when the blood touched the ground, it became a source of red paint. Interestingly enough, there is a very old and very well-known source of red paint, a red paint quarry, an ochre quarry, in northern Wyoming that has evidence of the earliest projectile points that we know along the Rocky Mountain front. Some are very northern and some are very southern, but they are nonetheless these artifacts that are some of the oldest in the continent. There are stories too from recent Blackfoot elders. They remember their ancestors going all the way to Wyoming to collect paint. So there's a memory there. So the best known of all Napi stories, the Rolling Rock. I believe that one time I heard that the Calgary Symphony had put up a play based, inspired in Napi on the Rolling Rock. I don't know if that is an urban legend, but that is what I understood. And in this story, it is very clear that there is a relationship between a process of breaking a particular rock into pieces and at a particular point in time, between 23,000 years and 10,000 years old, that truly and closely corresponds to the story of Napi and the rolling rock, his misbehavior toward the rock, and how the rock chased him, and how he made certain birds actually break the rock in pieces. And that is the origin of the Alberta erratic train. And now for the second creation. Now the second creation is very interesting. A lot of people, think in the communities that the world started with water. But if you look at the creation stories, at the old creation stories, some of the ones that continue to be told by elders, there were two creations. The second creation happened in water. And the story is very specific to Napi having caused the flooding of the earth. He was trying to defend his dog. His dog was killed by bears. The bears happened to be water bears, and he killed two bears, and the bears, in revenge, flooded the earth. And then he had to rebuild it from a clump of earth. He rebuilt the earth, but not before the flood happened. And I don't think that there is a more universal story than the story of the Great Flood. And in North America, in the Northern Hemisphere, but especially North American continent, it clearly relates to the ice melt, the formation of glacial lakes. Some of them are gigantic, like glacial Lake Edmonton, and then with the outbursts, violent outbursts of some of those lakes. In fact, when glacial Lake Edmonton burst, it created the bed of the North Saskatchewan and Battle rivers, the channels. That was how strong that outburst happened. And so if you think about Napi's recreation of the world from that particular perspective, then you can really connect why ancestral eyewitnesses who were present at the time that these lakes were bursting out and becoming much smaller and creating the rivers, you can understand why those particular environmental processes and events have been actually retained, memorialized in a cultural context, which is the second Napi creation. And this is the most interesting one. This is weird because this one has been variously interpreted as being a Sarcene story versus a Blackfoot story. But Clark Whistler, from the American Museum of Natural History, and his ethnographer, and a Blackfoot man named David Duval, they recorded this story, and they made a note at the bottom of the story. It's the story of a migration of Napi's people, the one that he created from the far north, way far north, and then bringing people down because they were suffering a lot in the cold and they didn't have any food. So he brings them down, and there's a lot of adventures in between, and some of them mentioning megafauna. And then he brings them down and camps, and makes these people camp right where, and the story said, where the blood reserve is today. That story was recorded in the late 19th century. And so what site is there? There's an archaeological site there, right where they may have first camped, is Wallis Beach. So Wallis Beach is a very interesting site, but first let's talk about humans and monsters, which are part and parcel of the Blackfoot creation story. After he created humans, in the area around the Upper Bow River and the Elbow River, when they joined, his brand new humans, did not have any weapons to defend themselves. And so these monstrous animals were actually killing them and devouring them. And so they pleaded with Napi to save them. And so Napi taught them how to make weapons, how to hunt, and how to build shelters. And it is interesting that right in that first encampment, Wallace Beach, it has a Blackfoot name, but I cannot pronounce it. Right in that encampment, you find footprints of a variety of megafauna. Elephants, mammoth, bison antiquus, old buffalo, scimitar cat, muskox, and more interesting than anything, you have evidence of the people camping there actually engaging in hunting of extinct horses and extinct camels. And this is one of the oldest, if not the oldest known Paleo-Indian site, early Paleo-Indian site, south of the Yukon, along the Rocky Mountain front. It is one of the most incredible findings here in Alberta. Then this camp has a lot of evidence of hunting. It has really good evidence. Artifacts embedded in these extinct animal remains. So it goes to say that the ancestors who memorialized Napi creation stories about monsters attacking them actually were directly interacting with extinct animals. And they have a record of it, not only an oral record, but also a scientific record for it. Glaciated landforms. This is an old story, but I'll tell you the summary of it. You can read it. But this was collected by James Wheeler Schultz, and he was hunting with the old Blackfoot, and they told him a story. After Napi had created humans, his humans were really annoyed because they were really worried because they had noticed that their bison, who had learned how to hunt, were actually climbing the mountains and going to the west side. And they did not want the bison to go to the west side. So they pleaded with Napi, and Napi said, well, I made bison to stay on the prairie, so not to worry, I will help you. So a while later, they found out through a vision that Napi had sent a giant they named Heavy Runner. And Heavy Runner traversed the continental divide with a great club. And he clubbed all the bison that were trying to cross the divide to the west. And the footprints around St. Mary Lake, which is where the story was told, are actually the footprints of Heavy Runner. And if you look very carefully at that photo around Lower St. Mary Lake, they are all terminal moraines from the Ice Age period. And how when the ice started melting, they created these giant landforms full of glacial stone called moraines. And you can see them from the Blackfoot perspective as the actual footprints of Heavy Runner. Now in this, this is the photo that I wanted to show you, I'm sorry. You can see the moraines on either side of the lake. Those are glacial formations. Now, there's two sites that are two ancient Paleo-Indian sites, in addition to Wallace Beach, that are actually associated with glacial landforms. One is here in Alberta, is Glacial Lake Vermilion in Banff National Park, and it is about 13,000 years old. It has really important evidence of a shelter, and among the evidence that it contains, it's the first evidence of bighorn sheep hunting, which is a tradition among the Blackfoot that is lesser known than coast bison hunting, but that continues on. It never stopped, but they still hunt bighorn sheep. Then my site, our site, Francois and I site. Billy Big Spring is a glacial kettle. It's smaller than Glacial Lake Vermilion. It was formed by the melting of a giant chunk of ice. And thereafter, it was used because it attracted all kinds of fauna to the water that was collected in that sunken basin, the kettle, which we call kettles. People flocked into that area for a minimum of 12,000 years. Until recently, relatively recently, people flocked into that area to hunt. And so we have the record. If you looked, we have all the record of Paleoinian points from early, middle Paleoinian all the way to Protohistoric period. And then if you look at the right, that is the stratigraphic record of the occupation, the full stratigraphic record of the occupation of that site. The site was only abandoned temporarily at about 7,600 years old. 7,600 years ago, when Mount Mazama in Oregon erupted. It was a tremendous eruption that caused climate change along the entire hemisphere. It deposited, because the westerly wind carried the ash from across the mountains, it deposited in the northern plains. In the northern plains, we find that remnants of that ash in archaeological sites in Alberta, as well as Billy Big Spring. There is evidence of ash in Montana, all the way to the Great Lakes and even in Greenland. So this was a major event, and people had to leave the area for about 200 to 600 years, but they returned to occupy the same exact place. And that is what is incredible about this, that they walked exactly in the footprints of their ancestors, so to speak, and camped exactly in the places where their ancestors, prior to Mount Mazama eruption, had camped. Now there is a mystery, a bit of a mystery of where they went. Some archaeologists say they probably went east. The Kainai say they went north. The archaeological record, in terms of projectile points, we think that they might have gone west and then came. We can find various stories that actually, correspond, also archaeological record that correspond that after people returned to these areas, they actually brought within new ideas, new material culture, and hence became, a period of great flourishing, for pre-contact Blackfoot people, and probably, the main point of their ethnogenesis as modern Blackfoot. So, since I came 20 years ago, I migrated into the great Northwestern Plains to do research. What has changed? Well, a lot of things have changed. The first thing is that we now have genetic evidence that somebody a Blackfoot ancestor, a very deep Blackfoot ancestor, actually was present in the North American contact during the Ice Age. We did not know that. The Blackfoot have always been regarded in this region as newcomers. Well, they are not newcomers. They came and went, sure, but they were not newcomers. The second issue is, as I explained, the fact that the modern contemporary linguistic models of Blackfoot indicate that there is a part of Blackfoot language that is archaic, not archaic in time, but arcane, extremely old, and not easily associated with classical Hokkien. Then we finally have integrating oral creation stories and archaeology, we have some evidence that the ancestors actually were here at a very early age, as early as very many other confirmed Paleoindian sites in North America. They have occupied the territory since at least 7,200 years ago, continuously after the eruption of Mount Mazama. And even though we have in the archaeological record evidence that diverse archaic period traditions came together from various different areas, they eventually became incorporated into what we called modern Blackfoot culture and society and ethnicity. So I have some afterthoughts about this that I want to share with you. You know, one of the interesting things that I have learned in looking at the late pre-contact evidence of bison hunting is that bison hunters actually planned for the future. They were not opportunistic bison hunters. They engineered their landscape. And so they used the past, the deep past, to inform their activities and also plan for the future of what those activities will look like for their children and grandchildren. The second thing is that Napi stories and Napi's world is the way in which Blackfoot specifically explain the arrival of this new world, you know, of the new world after, you know, at the end of the last ice age. And in those stories you find memories and events and processes that were so important, so crucial for their survival, that they continue to survive today. And then, of course, one of the important things that Blackfoot elder who previewed these slides wanted to make sure that I mentioned is that there's two ways in which you can tell these stories. The one is an exact old Blackfoot way, where the same words are repeated in the same sequence. And that goes not only for stories, but for songs, for ceremonial songs. But of course, we have to recognize that some of these stories are actually told by fathers, grandmothers, school teachers, and each person who teaches the story also incorporates new experiences, new understandings, new information, and also leaves out certain things that they no longer think are relevant to tell the story to children, which is what happens, you know, that is why stories are so dynamic, that's why they don't die out. And finally, let's talk about Napi. What does Napi's world provide to us? It is a comprehensive picture of creation of the Blackfoot world that is in place on the landscape. It has landscape reference. It has landforms. It has plants. It has fauna, extinct and modern. That is the most important part that we must remember. This is a way to show how the Blackfoot, from the first ancestors to the modern Blackfoot, actually place themselves in their territory. The second thing is that when you integrate Napi stories with science, specifically with archaeology, especially with archaeology, material evidence, you realize that Napi's world is both creation and also the evolutive power of his creation. His creation doesn't stay static. It changes as Napi traverses the Blackfoot world. And finally, what do Napi stories contain? The biography of the Blackfoot territory and the biography of the Blackfoot people. Thank you.